Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2023 EBSS Virtual Research Forum. This forum offers librarians an opportunity to present current research, especially research which is relevant to librarians in education and behavioral sciences. Thank you all for being here today. We're so excited to see everyone. My name is Jaleesa Kenyon, and I'm the chair of the EBSS Research Committee, which organizes this event each year. In case you are new to EBSS or not a current member of the section, we are the Education and Behavioral Sciences section of ACRL. This section was formed in 1968, and we have over 950 members. We always welcome new members who are interested in education and behavioral sciences librarianship. Before we get started with today's awesome presentations, I'd like to acknowledge this year's research committee. Diana Ramirez, who is our secretary, Melissa Cardenas Dow, Robin Ewing, Emily Fornwald, and Kelly Hangauer. The work of this committee and planning this forum could not have happened without all of these members. So thank you everyone for serving on this committee this year. Today's presentations were selected via a competitive open peer review process. During this process, the committee looked for original research that measured or investigated issues of high interest to EBSS librarians. We also evaluated each proposal's research design and analysis, relevance and value, and innovation, as well as how their research impacted diverse communities. Each presenter will have approximately 10 to 15 minutes to present. During each presentation, please share any questions you have in the chat, and we will ask them and follow up with those during the questions and discussion portion of today's forum, which will occur after all 5 presentations are complete. At the end of the forum, we will also share a link to a feedback survey, and we greatly appreciate any feedback you share with us. So with that, let's get started with presentation 1, paving the way or still charting a path. How are we measuring the learning effectiveness of library research guides, presented by Erica Dufresne and Leslie Solt. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen so you all can share yours.
Of course, the awkwardness of presenting on 2 screens here is going to make it weird for me. So excuse me as I look around at which one is where. Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Dufresne. Thank you so much for attending today. I'm a social sciences librarian at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And since early 2022, my colleague and co-presenter Leslie Solt, a librarian at the University of Arizona, along with Nicole Pogowski, also of University of Arizona Libraries, and Ceason Porter, our fabulous undergraduate student intern, have been working on this study of academic library research guides and students' information literacy skills. Thank you to ACRL and EBSS for giving us this awesome forum to discuss our work. Over the next few minutes, we'll go over the evolution of this study and discuss our research questions, methods, and sources of evidence, and share some preliminary findings and next steps as we head into the final stages of this project. We have a lot of information stuffed into these next 5 slides. So for those of you who are interested in the QR code and the URL at the bottom right, go to our slideshow, which includes supplemental links, of course.
Thanks for getting us started, Erica. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for being here today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project development and the history of how we got here. So Erica and I, as academic librarians with more than a few years of experience developing guides, we even worked together with another colleague who I think is in the audience, Elizabeth Klein, on a homegrown system back in the early 2000s. We've often wondered how guides could be adapted to focus more on learning instead of just on providing a curated list of resources. And by all means, we recognize that this isn't a novel idea or approach, but in 2019, we also came to realize that the active inertia that seems to overtake librarians as they construct guides is real. So we started looking into this. Some UA colleagues and I took a deep dive into the literature and found articles and research on how libraries approach pedagogical guide design. We found a lot of amazing ideas and approaches that we adopted and adapted for U of A, and then we wrote them up and shared them like librarians like to do, which is part of what makes our profession so awesome. In this process, we asked Erica to serve as our editor. We published in the library with a lead pipe. And this led to a bunch of conversations between us on how, as librarians, we don't have a lot of evidence-based understanding of pedagogical guide design. And so, we were talking a lot about this. During this time, Erica started seeing an increase in research consultations in Nebraska, for social sciences-based support on evidence synthesis projects. That came a little later for the University of Arizona. And again, our colleague Elizabeth Klein is the one at U of A working to put that together for us here. Erica attended evidence synthesis training, and that made her realize that we could develop an evidence synthesis process to try to answer our questions about the effectiveness of guides as teaching tools. Erica secured funding through the University of Nebraska Foundation Layman New Directions Award. She used it to hire a student, buy a software, and secure training and conference presentation expenses. She also framed her faculty development leave, also known as sabbatical, around guiding us through an evidence synthesis process. And now she is going to tell us more about our research questions and methods.
Initially, my attraction to using systematic review as a method was really driven by a very personal and obsessive goal of conducting a meta-analysis. I have a doctorate in educational psychology, and my coursework and dissertation were entirely quantitative. So when Leslie and I first started talking through this project, I thought it might be a great opportunity for using meta-analysis. Unfortunately for me, it became very clear early in our project planning that meta-analysis would not be a good fit for this project, where a meta-analysis combines results data from studies using standardized methodological approaches to calculate effect sizes. The many ways in which research guides and their relationship to learning have been evaluated, mostly by practitioners and not experimental researchers, of course, would be omitted from such a narrow focus on quantitative studies. So our early scans of the literature revealed a huge range of research designs and sources of data, all purporting to measure the effectiveness of guides for learning. With this really broad picture of the literature in mind, we spent a good amount of time deciding which type of evidence synthesis might be best for our needs, as well as what would be the most helpful to other practitioners. This, of course, required reaching out to our professional network. We signed up for the Evidence Synthesis Methods Interest Group's peer mentorship program, which matched us with Amy Riegelman, co-PI of the Evidence Synthesis Institute and co-chair of University of Minnesota's Systematic Review Service. We put feelers out with the ACRL Instruction Section Executive Committee to alert them to our study. We also met with Dr. Sarah Miller, co-chair of the Campbell Collaboration's Education Coordinating Group, and discussed the merits of evidence and gap maps, and learned of the Campbell's enthusiastic support for the work and research interests of librarians and other information professionals. As a result of all these conversations, we turned to designing a scoping review, which would allow us to identify, summarize, and map existing evidence surrounding research guides. We were specifically interested in answering 3 research questions over the course of our review. 1, what are the information literacy related learning outcomes associated with research guides? 2, how are research guides evaluated or assessed? And 3, what does the existing evidence say regarding their effectiveness at developing or improving information literacy skills of college students?
And now that we have you all on the edge of your seats, I am going to tell you about the scope, the review team, the tools, and the protocol. So our scoping review adheres to the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis extension for scoping reviews, which is also known as PRISMA-SCR. The review is working its way through the following 5 stages. So research question identification, collection of relevant studies, a framework and protocol development, study selection, data charting, and then synthesis of results. What we had studies are eligible for inclusion if they had an explicit or implied research question regarding the effectiveness of academic library research guides for developing college students' information literacy skills. And this is where these are super interesting to do. I don't know how many people are trying to work with faculty on supporting these, but you end up with a lot of questions like, well, what is an implied research question? And lots of things to muddle through in these processes. Because we were interested in the role that library research guides, including Pathfinders, web guides, course guides, archival guides, finding aids, etc., play in student learning and not necessarily a particular definition of information literacy, we cast a really wide net. The study population had to include college students, and the studies had to gather empirical data from or about this population as part of the study's assessment of research guide effectiveness. We did not set any date limiters, since interest and critiques of library subject guides go back literally decades. Erica will share some with you in the next slide. And our searches didn't actively limit results to any language, though our search terms were only in English, and the databases we used were the articles were predominantly written in English. We found a few publications in Italian and German, but struggled with translation. Google Translate and translation services were cost prohibitive, so we omitted those in this round. We registered our protocol with the Open Science Framework prior to conducting the study, and it can be viewed. There's a link that's attached to the QR code if you all want to go into OSF and take a look. We searched 6 scholarly databases. You can see what they are in the OSF document. We use Google Docs for project management. We use Zotero to keep our literature organized, and Covidence for screening and extraction. And that, if you are ever doing a review, it's a great tool. And they didn't pay me to say that. It has helped us enormously, though. And then Erica was also able to use Covidence to set up a Prisma flowchart. And it's kind of cool. You can see it on the slide, but just highlights. So to start with, we imported 1,683 studies to screen. We removed duplicates. That dropped us to 1,148 studies. 927 of them ended up being irrelevant. And so we did full text screening on 212 studies and are now down to a pool of 76. So that's where we are at in our process.
It is important to note that we have not yet completed our study, so it might be disappointing to hear that we're not going to be able to share all of the findings yet because we don't know them. While we have found the 76 total studies that meet all the predetermined inclusion criteria, we've only just begun the data extraction phase. So it will be at that point that we'll be confident in answering the question of how the effectiveness of library research guides is being measured. Data charting stage will allow us to categorize the studies for quick review of study design characteristics, intervention techniques, outcomes measured in effect sizes, assessment procedures, data interpretations, the role of theory, and the limitations according to the study authors. That said, we can share and discuss some emerging themes based on some bibliographic characteristics and our broad familiarity we have the literature after deeply engaging with it for so long. Theme 1, calling back to the title of our presentation, it is apparent that we are still charting a path when it comes to measuring the learning effectiveness of library research guides. While the majority of the studies use single case study design, the methods are by no means standardized, showcasing a range of quantitative, qualitative, and mixed approaches. Number 2, historical perspectives are very resonant. I'm really pleased that we chose not to use publication date as a limiter, and this is proven to be quite important. Our structured searches return literature published beginning in 1922 and giving us a century's worth of publications to explore how far we've come or not. Take, for instance, this excuse me, I'm going to try to go back there. That's the problem with putting links inside your Google Docs. Take, for instance, this 1967 report on bibliographic and research aids in Soviet studies, which warns how computer intoxication will not solve problems that require intellectual solution first. And this really wonderful reminder of how difficult education research is and has always been from 50 years ago, where 53% of the 502 students in the study sample either forgot or didn't realize that they had received any library instruction at all. Theme 3 is the door really is wide open for new research, especially using experimental measures and multi-level analyses. Lots of the evidence of effectiveness appears to be coming from surveys of learner satisfaction and preferences, usability studies, and web usage statistics. We have not seen many studies using control groups or randomization or studies capturing baseline measures of skills prior to receiving the interventions. Generalizability of findings seems to be a frequently cited limitation among the authors as well.
All right, so with that summary of where we are now, I thought I would just tell you a bit about what's next. And as Erica shared, we are going to begin the data extraction process in the next few weeks. Once we have completed that next phase, we plan on sharing our findings and then figure out where we go next as far as a study, and also how we apply what we find now to our own professional practice as we keep working through this research. As we proceed, we'll be bringing in another colleague, Nicole Pogowski, who will be focusing on what role theory has played in driving the empirical literature, and is going to help us try to think about new ways of developing and thinking about research guides. Thank you all so much for coming to our presentation. It's really wonderful to get to be a part of this community and to share what we have learned so far and learn from the rest of you. So thank you again.
Thank you, Erica and Leslie. So next we have Joyce Garzinski presenting on librarians as disinformation experts. Is that fake news?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity today to share my research that I have been working on. So this study is called Librarians as Disinformation Experts. Is that fake news? This research grew out of a situation I found myself in the late 2016, early 2017 era, when I was the lone representative of librarians at a fact-checking conference that was dominated by nonprofits, journalists, and others. And so I really felt being the lone librarian voice in the room. And in subsequent conversations after that, I ended up being consulted by other organizations and wondering after the fact, when they had summits on fact-checking and disinformation, why didn't we think to invite librarians to the table? And so I really began to be interested in how librarians are a part of or not a part of the conversation when it comes to mis and disinformation. So librarians have had a lot to say about disinformation. We have held dozens of webinars, workshops, conferences across multiple continents. And a meta-analysis of the published research on this topic has found 27 journal articles published between 2018 and 2021 in the library literature looking at disinformation. And the overwhelming majority of this research and this presentations about this topic have really focused on pedagogy. How do we teach students to be critical consumers of the news and other information that they come across? So this led me to think about the extent to which librarians are preaching to the choir or not. Is librarians' expertise on this topic recognized outside of the library field? And I also wondered, what are the implications for this recognition? Does this impact the solutions that are put forward and explored at a national level to this disinformation problem? So what I did was I located 124 New York Times articles that were published between 11/1/2016 and the end of 2022 that had fake news or disinformation in the headline. I selected that because when a word is in a headline, that suggests that the article is about that topic rather than just tangentially mentioning it. So that's the universe that I looked at. And then what I did was I pulled out the quotes that were in those 124 articles. And I coded the occupation of who was quoted. Are they talking about solutions to the mis or disinformation problem, or are they just talking about the problem? What is the subject of those solutions? Is it a technological solution? Is it an education solution? So what's the subject of that solution? And also, what's the expert's gender? And so now I'd like to walk you through my findings. So here is the first one that looks at the number of quotes by expert occupation. And we can see politicians are the ones, are the experts who are quoted the most, overwhelmingly. Librarians and library workers, not so much. If you disambiguate other, there are smaller categories, but the only occupation that was quoted less than us are teachers. So that's the expertise that is being referenced in the New York Times articles about mis and disinformation. So next on to gender. What's the gender of the experts who were quoted? And I expected, I expected that there would be more men quoted than women. I didn't expect it to be quite this bad. So yeah, over 3/4 of the quoted experts are men. Yeah, I was surprised at this great of a disparity. And let's look at solutions and the impact of and what's discussed in terms of solutions. So in the overwhelming majority of articles, solutions are not discussed. Experts are talking about the problems and what makes up the problems. Only in about 20% of the articles are solutions discussed. And an interesting finding that I found too was that female experts are significantly more likely than male experts to discuss solutions in their quotes. So 29% of female experts discuss solutions to the mis and disinformation problem, whereas 20% of male experts discuss solutions. And that's a significant difference. And in terms of the solutions that get discussed, about 2/3 either focus on technology or legal or political solutions to mis and disinformation. So technology solutions are things like having Facebook change their algorithm, those sorts of things. And legal and political are passing laws to prevent the spread of mis and disinformation, or bringing experts in front of Congress to talk about these problems. Only 14 of the expert quotes talked about education or teaching critical evaluation of sources as a potential solution to the mis and disinformation problem. So what conclusions can we draw from this research, and what are the implications? Because librarians represent less than 1% of the quotes in a major US newspaper, I think it's fair to say that their expertise really doesn't get a lot of recognition on the national stage, where our voice is not being heard. And also, I think the gender bias and the gender disparity plays into this as well. The tech sector, elected officials, professors, and journalists are still overwhelmingly male-dominated fields. And so that might explain the gender imbalance that we're seeing in terms of expertise as well. So I think you see that gender imbalance play out in the expertise that gets cited. And librarians' expertise in how to teach news literacy and information literacy is really missing from the national discussion about how to fix this problem. Only 2% of quoted experts talked about education-related solutions. And when we are hearing about education-related solutions, it's not us who are doing the talking. And I believe this has implications for how public policy is shaped when it comes to address mis and disinformation. If the national dialogue focuses on technological solutions and political solutions, that's where public policy is going to focus. And I think these results also have implications for us. I think we need to lobby more externally for recognition of our expertise. I think we need to be more vocal about our expertise on a national stage because we do have this expertise, and it would be beneficial to have that on a national stage. So thank you for this opportunity to share my research.
Thank you, Joyce. So now we have April Hines, who is presenting I Thought Librarians Just Checked Out Books, Initial Student Perceptions of Academic Library Resources and Services.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. I'm April Hines, and I'm really excited to talk to you today about my research project. I Thought Librarians Just Checked Out Books, Initial Student Perceptions of Academic Library Resources and Services. I'm the Journalism and Mass Communications Librarian at the University of Florida. Okay, so to give you some background, what prompted this research project is I was brought in to do a session for a class called MMC 1009, which is a large introduction to the major course that is taught to incoming journalism students, or really anyone who's interested in declaring one of the advertising, PR, broadcasting, or journalism majors within the College of Journalism. It's a huge class. If it's not required, I know it's highly suggested. And I was brought in to do a session. I had the entire class period in a lecture hall that had over 150 students. And when I did this session, I did sort of a top 10 things you should know about the UF libraries. And the instructor had initially asked me for some follow-up questions that he could embed in Canvas to have the students answer at the end of class to just kind of serve as a form of attendance. And initially, I thought I would just ask, just simple answers, or, what is the name of the One Button Studio and that kind of thing. But then it dawned on me that I could ask open-ended questions and really get some great data here. Not only is there is a large lecture class of this particular section, but there's also online sections. There's smaller classes that are in person. So this is a large volume of students who are receiving this content. And in this lecture, my top 10 things are hours, locations, things like fun stuff that we check out more than just academic materials, or we have access to things that they might want to digest for fun, like graphic novels or cookbooks, DVDs. I talk about off-campus access, how do you find materials in the libraries, e-resources, subject librarians and research guides, study spaces, and then inclusive services. And then the 3 questions that I posed to the students at the end of the presentation, the first one was, how can your librarian help you? Also, what are some resources and services you see yourself using in the future? And then the last question was, did you find anything surprising during this presentation? If so, what? And then students, if it's either submit answers in Canvas directly, or there have been some times where they've just filled out index cards in class. And what I found is that the answers to the what surprised you question were fascinating. And it really allowed me to see some of the incoming perceptions that first-year students have when they enter UF. Again, this is a large intro to the major course, so many of these students are first-year students. And what surprised them often surprised me. So I thought, wow, I'm really sitting on an amazing amount of data. This is kind of a gold mine. So what I started doing is I would ask the instructors to download their answers in Canvas and then send me the spreadsheets. So this is just a screen grab of a section of one of the spreadsheets. And you can see I have the textual answers here to that 3rd question, did anything surprise you? And I really wanted to focus on that question because I feel like that gave me the most fascinating results. So I started to do a thematic analysis, and I started with open coding, where you go through line by line, describing at the most basic level. And then once you have started to notice trends and themes, that's when you organize them in category and to create larger codes. So for example, if over and over again, I saw mentions of being surprised about Primo, ebooks, e-newspapers, streaming video, databases, then I would organize those into the general category of e-resources. And that's what I've started to do, is go through the open coding phase and recognize trends and themes. And then I've moved from open coding to axial coding, where I'm recognizing how those themes relate to each other, and how there might be larger categories and then subcategories. And then I'm doing this manually in a spreadsheet. I do want to move forward with maybe using some text analysis tools like Voyant. What words and phrases are used most frequently? I can tell you over and over again, I saw things like had no idea, or blown away, or excited to learn. And then sentiment analysis. Are any of these messages prominently positive versus negative? I can tell you, in hundreds of responses over several semesters, I've only had 2 people who've said, no, nothing surprised me. It's all been overwhelmingly excited responses to what surprised them. And then I want to move forward and bring in some other coders to look at reliability. And I want to do a norming session with 1 or 2 other coders who we can agree on what our general categories should be, and then practice categorizing the lines of text into those general categories. So for example, in this first one, I found all the technology they offer, as well as the 10,000 DVD collection interesting. Then I would put a 1 in the tools and tech column. So we could do a couple of those together to make sure we're on the same page. And then we can come back, compare results, and decide how we want to go from there. And then also, because I have hundreds of responses from many semesters, and there's no way I could code all of this by hand, or it would take me a very long time. So I'm also thinking about experimenting with qualitative data analysis software such as Delve. And any of you people who have more experience with coding and qualitative analysis, I would love your feedback on ways I can also move forward. And then some more just general background data. Again, these are mostly first-year students in their first semester. And UF is a top 5 public university with an undergraduate enrollment of 34,000, to give you some idea of our demographics. And then the initial analysis was from a subset of collected data, so 380 responses collected over fall 2021 and spring 2022. Okay, so initial findings, what surprised them? And this is based on my open coding of finding sort of large general categories that I was able to organize content into. So they were over and over again, I saw that they were shocked that the libraries were more than books and study spaces. You can see here this person said, I had no idea there was so much more to the libraries than just being a place to study at UF. There was a lot of comments about being surprised about what librarians do. I really emphasized in my presentation that we have masters in library science, we're experts in research, we can connect you with resources. And you can see this was the quote that inspired the title of this presentation. I found it surprising that librarians can do so much for you as they have a master in information. I was always under the assumption they just checked out books. They were surprised by our technology and tools. We had people say, like, I didn't even know libraries had tools and technology that you could check out. E-resources, it was interesting to me that they may have known that we had databases, but they didn't know that in those databases, we have things like streaming video, e-newspapers, business information, and that always kind of floored them. Like, I don't think they thought that our databases had anything of value to them other than maybe finding an article for a paper. And then fun stuff, a lot of comments about they were surprised that the libraries had more to offer than just academic resources, like novels they could read for fun, streaming video platforms, graphic novels, DVDs. And then interlibrary loan and uBorrow, I was kind of shocked that this is one of the top 6 categories, because I almost debated on whether I would even mention this in my presentation or not. Because you think first year students, what do they care about interlibrary loan? But when I framed it to them, they had access to resources from all over the world, and it didn't just have to be academic resources. They loved that idea. They loved that they had access to such a wealth of information that could be delivered to them in the library system, their home library. So practical implications. What does this all mean, and what can we do with this? This quote here on the left is probably one of the ones that shocked me the most. This student had no idea you could check stuff out of the library and take it home. That was a new concept to them. So I think the fact that the baseline understanding that students might have about how modern libraries work is maybe different now than what it was 5 years ago, and that we can't really assume what that baseline is. We may be dealing with students who've never encountered a library setting before. And then the idea that students were so shocked about what librarians do, what our role is, how we can help them, really said to me that we need to frame our messaging from ask a librarian to why would you ask a librarian, and what can they help you with? Students can't ask us for help if they don't know what we do. And then how can we develop strategic marketing and outreach efforts that speak to these surprise points? You know, now that we have a better idea, or at least at my institution, I have a better idea of what those are. So I started doing this a little bit. This is a Twitter thread I did about a year ago on the top 10 things every student should know about the libraries. But my top 10 things were the surprise points that came from my initial look through of this data. And as you can see, the thread got over 16,000 impressions, 886 engagements. So that shows me that students are kind of hungry for this type of information, and that they really do want to bridge that gap. And we have a long way to go on how we can develop those marketing and outreach efforts. But I think that knowing where the gaps are and their initial perceptions when they enter the university can really help us do that in a more effective way. So thank you very much. Sorry. There we go.
Thank you so much, April. Okay, so now we have Catherine Fraser-Reel and Erica Dufresne talking about writing instructors' intentional integration of the information literacy framework.
Everyone, again, many thanks to EBSS for hosting this forum. I'm Catherine Fraser-Reel, and my colleague Erica Dufresne and I, who you heard from a bit earlier today, are both associate professors in the Teaching Partnerships Unit at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Libraries, and we are so pleased to be here today to get to share with you about our project. This afternoon, we are going to talk about an exploratory qualitative study that examines how first-year writing instructors' conceptualizations of information literacy evolved over the course of their participation in an inquiry group that we co-developed and co-facilitated with UNL's Director of Composition and Rhetoric, Debbie Mittner, and with Janelle Simons, Humanities Librarian, and a colleague of ours at the UNL Libraries. So for Professor Mittner, this inquiry group that we developed provided a way to propel forward an in-progress course redesign that was occurring for first-year writing courses. It was set out to focus on research-based writing as well as multimodal learning. It also provided much needed and sought after summer funding for instructors within these courses. And for us in the libraries, the inquiry group was a path for us to try to tackle the perennial problem that I'm sure many of you can relate to of scaling library support, collaboration, and information literacy integration in and for one of the largest foundational course sequences on our campus. So nearly 3,500 undergraduate students take these first-year writing courses at UNL each academic year. Partnerships between libraries and undergraduate composition and first-year writing programs are well represented in the library literature and to some extent within the literature of composition and writing programs dating back to the 1950s. You can see here that we're highlighting a few of the relatively more recent key pieces related to exploring information literacy and writing or composition studies as complementary disciplines and complementary processes. A variety of approaches for collaboration among librarians and compositionists have been documented in a variety of articles, presentations, and compilations like the three that you see here. These are several edited volumes that have been published within the past decade. To tackle challenges of scalability, especially at larger institutions like the University of Nebraska, where the number of first-year writing sections and instructors far outnumbers the number of librarians that we have available to support or work with these classes, so-called train-the-trainer methods can empower first-year writing leadership and instructors to integrate information literacy with support from librarians. Train-the-trainer methods, of course, include things like teacher development programs, learning communities, communities of practice, and inquiry groups like the one that we developed, led by librarians or co-led by librarians and composition instructors. So with grant funds that we received from our university's Teaching and Learning Center in early 2020, so a very interesting time to be taking on a project like this, we recruited and assembled during the summer of 2020 a team of 11 first-year writing instructors who we came to know over time as Writing Information Literacy Fellows. Together, what we did was we formed a 7-week-long inquiry group during which we co-created learning goals, lesson plans, assignments, and other learning objects that were to be piloted during the Fellows Fall 2020 courses. We focused on 3 courses in UNL's first-year writing sequence. They include writing as inquiry, writing as argument, and writing in communities. What we did was we presented fellows with information literacy concepts, and perhaps most importantly, we provided a lot of space, time, and some structure for them to examine their own courses for opportunities where they were excited and they saw good opportunity for integrating information literacy within their own course designs. So as we kicked off the program, we got to know one another. We introduced program goals and deliverables. We did some work to develop some shared language related to information literacy. In our first 2 weeks, we explored the ACRL Information Literacy Framework, the UNL Library's translation and learning outcomes of that framework. And we had some really great discussions kind of exploring those intersections or perceived intersections and connections between information literacy and composition studies. In the third week, We focused on course designs. We brought in an instructional designer colleague at UNL who introduced and led some discussion about Wiggins and Metteague's backward design framework. And then fellows began to articulate their own learning outcomes centered on information literacy concepts that they wanted to prioritize within their own courses the coming academic year. After that, what we did was we provided 3 weeks of work times during which cohort groups, one for each of those 3 classes in the sequence, collaborated both synchronously and asynchronously to design new assignments, activities, and in some cases, entire units for their courses. Erica, Janelle, and I each worked with a group to consult and to provide feedback at this stage. And then finally, at our 4th and our final synchronous meeting of the inquiry group, fellows gave lightning talks. They described what they developed and any key takeaways that they had gleaned from the program. So now that I've kind of set the stage, hopefully, and given you a sense of how we approached and implemented the inquiry group, Erica is going to talk to you about the accompanying research project.
You can see from all of the data that might have been gathered through this inquiry group that there are a number of research projects that we can see stemming from this. But of course, a fundamental interest in this project for Catherine and myself has always been understanding how to better develop first-year writing students' information literacy skills through external partnerships. In our work with the first-year writing instructors, we were especially watchful for how fellows' perceptions and classroom applications of information literacy shifted throughout the inquiry group. And this became the guiding research question for this study that we're talking about today. To answer this question, we're relying on 4 primary sources of data that we gathered throughout the course of the program. The first is a pre-program survey in which the 11 fellows were asked to share their existing knowledge about information literacy, where they learned about it, and an assessment of their current approaches to it in their first-year writing courses. We also had them deliver a post-program reflection in which they reviewed their pre-program survey responses and then discussed how their conceptions of information literacy had changed or not, how they felt about their ability to achieve the program learning outcomes, and to describe what felt most challenging about the curricular/pedagogical work of incorporating information literacy into their classes. Prior to the program, we also asked each fellow to submit a sample syllabus from a first-year writing course that they had taught. And then after they had finalized their syllabi that they were teaching for that fall semester, we also asked them to share the final syllabus with us that they designed as part of the inquiry group. To evaluate whether and how the fellows' perceptions shifted over the course of the program, we conducted a coding project to identify instances of the ACRL framework within each of the documents that we could then use to do some exploratory comparative analyses. I'm not sure if anyone in this group has tried to do this before, but it should come as no surprise that coding the ACRL framework is not at all an easy task. With 6 conceptual frames presenting 45 knowledge practices and 38 dispositions, the complexity of the framework appropriately mirrors the complex ways in which individuals grapple with information. While some authors have offered guided processes for coding the framework, it did make more sense for our project to develop our own approach. So our research team's coding process was iterative. In April, this should sound familiar. We developed a draft coding manual built upon 3 main documents shown here. First, the direct review of the ACRL framework, that internally developed document that Catherine was talking about earlier, which is the foundational guide for the University Library's programmatic teaching and learning related efforts. And then a really, really thoughtfully done coding schema that was developed by Benelek and Rundles in 2021, who conducted a content analysis looking for the framework within syllabi of information literacy courses taught by librarians. So we created a rainbow color coded manual, and we proceeded to code all of the documents independently and then collaboratively in our team of 4, using consensus to resolve any differences in coding, of which there are, of course, quite a few. This is a really laborious and interesting and engaging task that we went through trying to reach consensus on all of these codes. Once coding was completed, we transferred files into MaxQDA software for final markup and thematic analysis, and then SPSS 28.0 to generate descriptive frequencies and crosstabs of the data. And through our coding work, we found 497 instances of the frames across all documents received from the fellows. We tagged an additional 27 items as broadly relevant to the information literacy umbrella. In our examination of the data, we found evidence of significant shifts in fellows' approaches to information literacy. And of course, in our manuscript, we'll be sharing the full details of the results, but I didn't know if it would be a really appropriate form to try to go into the numbers here. So these are some broad themes that we were discovering. So in the pre-program surveys and syllabi, we did discover that fellows held really broad awareness of information literacy. And when we started looking into that, it really felt like their conceptions were far more aligned with the early 2000s era information literacy competency standards than today's framework. For example, coded instances frequently aligned with using checklist approaches for vetting sources and having librarians train students in the mechanics of database searching. Most of the fellows described information literacy in ways that really separated or otherwise differentiated it from their own discipline. When they discussed information literacy in the classroom, almost all information literacy related instruction was conducted by a librarian or using library-owned resources or collections. And this lack of disciplinary ownership combined with their very broad definitions left many of the fellows feeling overwhelmed by the thought of being responsible for introducing such an enormous conceptual framework into their already packed courses. As one fellow commented, "Often I've found that in the crush of trying to scaffold my students for their 3 major writing assignments in the English department's core courses, I suddenly have far less time than I want to work with students on understanding and critically evaluating sources." Compare these documents to what we discovered when analyzing their post-program ones. Rather than thinking they had to cover the entirety of information literacy, the fellows became much more selective in which frames they focused on in their classrooms. As examples, we found more nuanced engagement with authorities constructed beyond simple vetting of sources. Research as inquiry, which was largely absent from the pre-program documents, became much more prominent as fellows began to see the interconnections between writing and research processes. Most of the fellows moved away from library instruction one-shots or standalone information literacy assignments, with many remarking on how easy it became to fully integrate information literacy throughout the entire semester. In the words of one fellow, "I found that having authorities constructed as a learning goal for my students meant that I focused on it more often in classroom discussions and lessons. I realized that I was doing this without even directly thinking, okay, time to focus on authority. It just became a habit when I talked about it with students. I didn't have to think about where to incorporate it. I just began to see opportunities for it throughout the lessons, lectures, and material." As with all studies, there are limitations and complications affecting our work. Our program did kick off in 2020, and the pandemic weighed heavily on all of us. The entirety of our inquiry group was conducted over Zoom, and while the instructors really did their best job to focus on the goals and outcomes of the program, many, if not all, of their post-program reflections focused on the trauma of the semester and the challenges of having to quickly transition their face-to-face instruction plans to fully remote. Also, this is a very exploratory study, so we don't have an expectation that our findings are generalizable. So we would like to see more work in these sorts of areas. And this is not really a true pre-post study. The documents that we use to gather the pre and post data aren't the same, except for the syllabi in some instances.
Okay, so to wrap up, I'm going to briefly share about some of the ways that we've been following this work up in practice and some plans that we have for sharing a bit more broadly about it. One great opportunity that this project brought on was to collaborate with first-year writing leadership and instructors to integrate some of the writing information literacy inquiry group's work into a section of their so-called online source book. This is something that all new graduate teaching assistants in English are exposed to and that they work through in their orientation as they start every new academic year. All of those new GTAs are going to be teaching at least one course within the sequence their first academic year. So it's a great chance to get in front of them, some of these things that came out of our inquiry group. So what we did there is we provided some text that came directly from some of the conversations and discussions within the inquiry group, and we were able to link to some of the shared learning objects that the fellows created as well. Another thing that we did is we hired one of the writing information literacy fellows as a graduate teaching assistant within the libraries, which was awesome. So within her one-year appointment, she and I designed and collaborated some additional teacher development programs that she worked on with other instructors and fellows to expose and continue the conversation with our composition instructor colleagues about what information literacy could look like within those courses. We also created a research guide that's tailored to 2 of the 3 courses in that sequence. And it also includes a page that's just for instructors that includes a chart where we've tried to map and include a lot of examples, again, that came out of the work within the inquiry group. This guide is now automatically embedded within Canvas, our course management system, for pages of all these 3 courses. And we're just starting to begin and pay attention to and gather some data about if and how it's being used. To build upon the writing information literacy resources that we've linked in these spaces, a sort of pie in the sky project that I'd love to collaborate on at some point is to create an open source curated collection of UNL instructor developed learning objects related to information literacy from our writing information literacy as well as other composition instructors. And I would love to see those learning objects licensed with Creative Commons licenses so that it's really clear how other instructors can use and build upon and remix them. Next steps for our research, we're working to finish up and submit an article about our inquiry group and this coding project this summer at last. And we're also considering writing a separate piece that's more of a case study during which we'd like to focus a bit more deeply on some of the documents from a select number of fellows, particularly rich documents. Our collaborators in the English department are also writing for a composition instructor audience about their experiences with this collaboration and their thoughts related to information literacy. And with that, we'd just like to thank you for your interest in the project and again to EBSS for this great opportunity to share about it.
Thank you, Catherine and Erica. So now we have Kate Zollner presenting on graduate student research and library use experiences. I think you're muted, Kate.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, thanks.
Great. My name is Kate Zollner, and I'm a reference and instruction librarian and the assessment coordinator at the University of Montana in Missoula. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the EBSS Research Committee and Chair Jalissa Kenyon and ACRL employee Eloise Sharp for their work in organizing this forum and welcoming my participation. So the research project I'm sharing with you today utilizes an ethnographic design to describe and interpret the research and library experiences of graduate students at the university and to find out what guidance they would offer other graduate students about research in the library. I hoped the narrative stories I heard and information I learned could inform the design of services for and outreach to graduate students and to improve my professional practice. The project is grounded in my work environment, specifically the university's interest in increasing research, improving the graduate student experience, and the move within the library away from a librarian liaison model. So after working for many years with students in the university's College of Education and Human Sciences, I now have the responsibility and opportunity to work with all graduate students. For those reasons, I sought to better understand the experiences of graduate students and to focus on graduate students from multiple colleges in my research, rather than focusing on a specific discipline or students from a particular demographic population. In doing the study, I solicited participants through graduate program directors who either personally recommended a student to me or forwarded my project information to students to respond to me directly. This resulted in 18 participants. The study was approved under the exempt category by the university's Institutional Review Board, and students were compensated $25 and university money for an hour of their time. I conducted semi-structured interviews with the graduate students using a 14-question interview protocol that was largely focused on research and library experiences, but also asked students what led them to choose their program of study, to share guidance they would provide to other students, and to comment on how the library might better meet their needs. All of the interviews were conducted during spring semester 2019. 17 of the 18 were conducted face-to-face in a library study room, recorded and transcribed, and the other was conducted over the phone and documented via notes. The table on this slide provides program data on the 18 interviewees. You can see the students I interviewed were from 7 different colleges, 10 were studying at the master's level and 8 at the doctoral level. One of the students was a distance education student. The interviews generated over 240 single-spaced pages of transcripts or notes. I'm in the process of finalizing the coding categories to enable a thorough and compelling analysis of the data set. I'm also looking at the data from specific lenses, such as identity, that the interview guide did not directly address, but which we know from previous research shape students' experiences. The findings I'm sharing today are preliminary and based on the initial themes I've interpreted and on reviewing participant responses to specific interview questions. So two of the preliminary patterns I've identified in the data relate to finances and scoping. Finances and funding influence students' choice of the university, their research, and their obligations. Lily from Environmental Science and Natural Resource Journalism said that the UM program was much cheaper than others they applied to, and that the amount of student loans they would need to take out was hard to beat in the humanities. Jake from Public Administration, who is also a university employee, said that the tuition waiver was a big incentive to go to grad school. Isaac from History indicated that a grant from their department enabled them to travel out of state to an archive that held papers pertinent to their thesis, and that they would not have been able to make the research visit otherwise. And Kara from Fish and Wildlife Biology talked about the research being influenced by the boundaries for them in their research assistantship, and stated the reason for attending a particular conference every year as, because my funders helped put it on. Finances or financial obligations also factored into students' use and perceptions of the library. Sarah from Sociology commented that it was amazing that the library checked out laptops because they had an old computer that was going to die soon. They also said that a challenge in the library space is walls without outlets because of having an old computer that needed to be plugged in. And Katie from Psychology commented that the helpfulness of the study rooms related to doing group work, saying the person who's hosting has special obligations, like to clean up and to provide food and snacks and things. So coming here is just a neutral location where nobody needs to feel more stressed. Scoping was another element of research discussed by students in terms of a doable thesis or dissertation project and in terms of searching. Daniel from Public Health said that their committee and professors regularly address the importance of having a reasonable scope. They said that there's a concept that they regularly will discuss where there's an element of impact, rigor, and feasibility, and how they're all important. But for the purposes of completing a dissertation, you really want to do something that's feasible. And Haley from Resource Conservation indicated a challenge was, and I quote, feeling like, okay, I've read enough papers, I've sampled what there is, what we know, and I feel like I have a representative understanding. That's sort of like a challenge I struggle with, I think. And I don't know, at some point, you kind of have to stop reading papers and start writing. And thinking of what findings to draw attention to for this forum beyond the finances and scoping, I look specifically at responses from interviewees in EBSS programs to questions about guidance they would offer other graduate students. When asked, what do you think is the most important thing for a graduate student to know about the library, Katie from Psychology stated definitely that it has a bunch of different resources and it's not just for books. The books have been really helpful, but the study rooms and the general meeting spaces have been very helpful, especially for group projects. And Grace in Integrated Arts and Education said, there's probably everything and more than you need here, or at least you can access it through the databases and things. It's just a matter of knowing how to find it, and that's where knowing your resources and figuring out first is a pretty important part of it. In terms of a tip, asking for help rose to the top. Taylor from Educational Leadership said, ask. I was scared to ask at the beginning, not anymore. I didn't know who to ask, even of professors. A librarian could guide you in the appropriate direction. And Matt from International Educational Leadership said, well, the staff is, that's a big thing. And so don't be shy, ask for help when you need it. So students in the EBSS areas indicated that knowing the range of resources that are available to them and how to search databases is important, as well as not being afraid to ask for help. After my preliminary analysis of the data, I see several applications to my professional practice. First, there is a basic need for graduate students on my campus to be oriented to the range of services offered by the library and to library employees as a resource for or a partner in their education and research. Second, students need assistance on searching and scoping their work. Third, communication, instruction, and outreach to students are impactful or desired at the program, course, or lab level, integrated or filtered through a program director, course, lab, or student group, rather than from a general graduate listserv or group. Fourth, partnerships with other campus units that are heavily serving graduate students, such as the Campus Writing Center, are ripe for development or improvement. And additionally, considering the financial reality of graduate students and gaining a better understanding of their use of the physical library building post-COVID are worthy of further review. I also see applications to research. If I were to do a similar project in the future, I would consider making changes. I would look at doing a survey paired with a follow-up interview in terms of methodology. I would look for colleague collaborators in terms of process and analysis. I would consider new questions, particularly about space post-COVID. I would think about student demographics in a deeper way. And another element I've been reflecting on is feeling restrained in what information I can share about the interviewees, given the need to protect their identity. For example, the military background of one interviewee and the religious upbringing of another greatly influenced their education and research path and approaches. A previous project I aimed to work on but didn't move forward for some reasons related to this, but instead of an in-depth research project, it was conceived as publicly featuring or highlighting graduate students' experiences and advice so that other students can learn from them. In that type of project, the richness and nuances of students' lived experience would be more visible. So it seems that, like the graduate students, scoping my own research was a challenge. Thank you for attending today, and I look forward to the questions and discussion.
All right, thank you, Kate, and thank you to all of our presenters today. So now we have some time for questions and discussion. So there is one question in the chat from Jennifer. It says, is anyone going to use a large language model like generative AI to code your results?
I'll jump in for that one. I wish I'm just like, I would love to have used that because I think it would probably do a lot better job than our team was able to do with the framework coding because it's so stinking hard. And I would love to see what a computer might be trained to do because I think it would have improved reliability, even with the four of us trying to come to consensus with the whole thing. So that's a fabulous suggestion for our next project, for someone else's project to take on. Great idea.
Yeah, I agree. I read all the stories and coded, and it's a lot. So having extra tools like that, I think, would make a real difference.
Yeah, I'm similar in that I feel like I would love to do something that's more in depth and use either qualitative software or explore sort of the AI models. But right now, I just don't feel like I have the expertise to get started. So lucky for me, there are other specialists, like we have a natural language processing AI library now. So I have people I could reach out to explore this further. But I just started doing it the old fashioned way, but would love to try to do a more automatic process and see how that works.
Yeah, thanks for raising that question, Jennifer. That's definitely something I'll look into. I hadn't thought about.
Okay, any other questions? I think I've also given folks the option to unmute themselves. So if you'd like to ask a question unmuted, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you, or continue putting questions in the chat. Okay, it looks like we have a question for Joyce from Teresa. Joyce, have you thought of a way for librarians to be the go-to people if we want on information/disinformation?
That's a really good question. I think at this point, it's a lot of dispelling some of those stereotypes that are out there. I wonder to what extent we are hampered by the perceptions of our profession. You know, like what April talked about, that we're not seen as having that expertise. So I think the more we talk about it outside of our own profession, I know when I have done that, it's been surprising to a lot of the audience. I've given a number of community presentations in our local area to like senior groups and things like that. And they're often like, why are you, a librarian, talking to me about this? And once I make the connection for them, they go, oh, okay. And then they have lots of other questions about what we can do. So I think just even getting out there into the community and helping to dispel some of those stereotypes about what we know, I think is really important.
And I just might add to that, you know, at our university, we have tons of workshops for faculty through the university, like through the public affairs office on like how to write for the general public and how to get your research out there. And we need to do that too. You know, we need to write thought pieces that are circulated, or develop relationships with the news outlets, or, you know, how many of you are listed on your university's experts page where people look for experts to be quoted in news stories? How many of us are on there as experts on research and information literacy and fake news and all those things? So, you know, maybe we need to do what we see our peers elsewhere doing as well.
Thank you both. Okay, we have a question from Jennifer. With all the research you are doing, can you bring it to your institution so they can recommend to teach faculty to listen to librarians? Any success? How did you do it?
Well, Catherine, I suppose one of the unique things with UNL libraries, librarians here, we have faculty status with tenure. And so that certainly helps us get in the room and have access to the same resources as teaching faculty do. So that's been one of the most important things. Like, it gave Catherine and I access to the CTT grant that funded the project that we did. It also gave me access to the grant that funded the scoping review project that I'm working on right now. So without those resources and the shared status, I mean, it is really, really difficult to do. So I'll admit that that's been a really huge privilege and benefit for working for UNL.
One of the things that has really benefited me has been being involved in shared governance at my university, being involved in different committees and things like that. I chair our university's budget committee, and I'm definitely the first librarian, probably the first female to ever chair that committee. And, you know, I think it's a surprise to a lot of people, like, a librarian knows about budgeting. Yeah, we're competent. We can do this stuff. And so, you know, I think being involved in lots of unique and different ways, I think helps dispel some of those stereotypes too. And also it's really helpful to have a strong leadership. And, you know, I know our dean constantly advocating Even the provost has mentioned to us that, our dean's a good advocate for us. So I think it's really important to have an advocate in those high-level positions too.
We have another question from Teresa, and I think this was also kind of put out maybe more generally to attendees today, but maybe each of you could talk a little bit more about it on your at your own universities or colleges. How many universities have a required 4-credit class for students to learn about their library?
We have a credit-bearing information literacy course at UF, but it's not required.
We don't have a specific course at the University of Montana. The information literacy outcomes are written into the writing curriculum. So those courses are required, but it's not a specific info lit or library course.
Like April, we at UNL have a 1-credit course that is not required.
I will say I taught a section of that class, and some of the comments I got back is this should be a required class. So the students think it should be required, but it's not.
Okay, I have a question for you, Kate. You mentioned that kind of potentially one of the applications to your practice, or maybe to your colleagues' practice, was further review of students' financial realities and kind of how that affected grad students' use of the library. What are some of your kind of initial ideas related to that? Because I think sometimes we might focus maybe on course reserves or low, no-cost textbooks. So what are some of the other things that maybe spring to your mind after participating in those interviews?
I guess I haven't really generated a lot of ideas. I think, it comes forward a lot related to undergraduate students. And I know on our campus, we do have a food pantry now. It's not within the library, but that's something campus is doing. And I think some libraries are supporting work like that. I think just being more aware of it. I know graduate students also are, trying to unionize. It's recognized that they don't get paid enough for their TA and RA positions. But yeah, if others have ideas, please let me know. But I'm still kind of in that generative phase.
Hi, this is Kelly. I have a question for Erica. Let's see, sorry. The first group here. I'm interested in hearing more about the experience with the evidence synthesis peer or the mentorship program. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I can. So in our slides, we included a link to it, but it's an ACRL interest group. And attending the Evidence Synthesis Institute, it was something that they promoted. They said, by the way, there's this listserv, an interest group. And so I'd happened to notice that they had posted a call for mentors. And so when Leslie and I were starting to work on this, I was like, yeah, let's take advantage of this. So it's just a form you can submit for it. And then they just matched us with Amy Riegelman, of all people, who's overseen or contributed to, 300 some systematic reviews so far in her career, I think. And it was absolutely wonderful. I mean, she's very busy. Thank you for sharing that, Elizabeth. But we just worked around her schedule, and she met with us a few times just over Zoom, and we sent her drafts, and it was just exactly what you would kind of want. So it was a really, really valuable experience, and we're so appreciative of all the support that we've had throughout this project.
And there was a question from Laura saying, thank you to everyone. And are you planning to share your slides from today? I believe that last year, folks who wanted to share their slides, if you didn't have a link right away, you could put it in the chat. please feel free to send that link to me following this session, and we can make sure that Alois has that link and can include it with the recording as well. So this might be a question for you, Joyce. What is EBSS doing at Annual?
So we're working on a social. So details of that will be forthcoming. We'll have a chance to all get together and chat, so it'll be good.
So I have a question for April. April, I really appreciated how you reframed kind of ask a librarian to what can you ask a librarian, and the difference between those questions. And I know that our library, that kind of like marketing and outreach is challenging to kind of get that information out there, kind of for those differences and just kind of connect with students. So what are some of the ways that you think, like just brainstorming, what are some marketing and outreach strategies to kind of change that piece of communication? Do you think maybe could work for your campus or for others?
Well, one thing that I think can be really helpful is, again, if students don't know what we do and they don't know how we can help them or the types of services that we offer, like how can they ask us for help? And so colleagues of mine did a survey across multiple institutions, and one quote that they kind of latched onto that always stuck with me is they asked, have you ever asked a librarian for help? And the student replied, I don't know what I'm supposed to ask them about. So that makes it pretty clear. So what I try to do when I'm introducing myself to students is I spend a good amount of time on what do I do, what is the role that I play, and here are some things that I can help you. And I think of it almost as like a menu of options. So when I get brought in for an instruction session, I tell them who I am, what my background is, and I say, I can help you with finding business information, finding statistics, finding peer-reviewed articles, getting behind paywalls. If there's a resource you want, you keep hitting the paywall, we can see if we can get access to that. And once I start listing these things, you can almost see it click when they're like, oh, yeah, I do need help with that. I didn't know a librarian can help me with that. So like just kind of presenting the menu of options, and to faculty too. I think it works both ways, but I just don't think it's enough for us to say, go ask a librarian, because I don't really understand what that means always. So. Yeah, the money angle works too.
Okay, any other questions via chat, or if you want to unmute yourself? Yes, we have a question from Andrea about, will the recording be shared out? Everyone who attended today and registered will receive a link to the recording, but we're also going to share the recording widely across all of the ALA ACRL Connect lists where the forum was advertised. So we'll share a link there as well for anyone who wasn't able to register because we reached the cap. So we'll definitely do that as soon as that's available. Okay, so it looks like there aren't any other questions. So I just want to say thank you again to all of our presenters. It was wonderful to hear about your research, and thank you for taking the time to be here today. Thank you again to the EBSS Research Committee members. Thank you to Alois Sharp for setting up this Zoom forum for us and managing all of the technology. And thank you to all of the attendees who were here too and for all of your great questions. Thanks, everyone.